Invasion of Poland, 1939. The invasion of Poland, also known as the September Campaign, or 1939 Defensive War, was a joint military invasion of Poland by Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, and a small Slovak contingent that marked the beginning of World War II. Germany initiated the attack on September 1, 1939, without a formal declaration of war, utilizing a strategy known as blitzkrieg or lightning war. This tactic involved rapid, coordinated strikes by tanks, infantry, and aircraft, aimed at overwhelming the Polish defenses swiftly. German forces advanced from the north, south, and west, quickly making significant gains. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, bombed Warsaw and other major cities, causing significant civilian casualties and disrupting Polish communication and supply lines. Despite fierce resistance, the Polish military was outmatched in both technology and numbers. On September 17, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east, fulfilling the secret terms of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty signed between Germany and the Soviet Union in August 1939. This unexpected move divided Polish forces, leading to a rapid collapse of organized resistance. By early October, Poland was completely occupied, and its government was forced into exile. The invasion demonstrated the effectiveness of Germany's new military tactics and marked the beginning of a brutal occupation that would last until the end of the war. Fall of France, 1940. The fall of France in 1940 was a pivotal moment in World War II. In May 1940, Germany launched a major offensive against France and the Low Countries, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, using blitzkrieg tactics. German forces bypassed the heavily fortified Maginot Line, a series of defensive fortifications along France's eastern border, by advancing through the Ardennes, a region mistakenly considered impassable by French planners. The German advance was swift and decisive. Within 6 weeks, German forces had reached the outskirts of Paris. The French government declared Paris an open city to avoid its destruction and fled south. On June 22, 1940, France signed an armistice with Germany, leading to the occupation of northern France and the establishment of the Vichy regime, a collaborationist government in the unoccupied southern part of the country. The fall of France shocked the world and demonstrated the effectiveness of German military strategy. It also led to a significant shift in the balance of power in Europe, with Britain standing alone against the Axis powers. Battle of Britain, 1940. The Battle of Britain was the first major military campaign fought entirely by air forces. Lasting from July to October 1940, the battle was a critical turning point in the war. Following the fall of France, Nazi Germany sought to gain air superiority over the Royal Air Force, RAF, to pave the way for an invasion of Britain, codenamed Operation Sea Lion. The German Luftwaffe launched a series of bombing raids aimed at destroying British airfields, radar stations, and industrial centers. However, the RAF, bolstered by advanced radar technology and the tenacity of its pilots, successfully defended the skies. The Luftwaffe shifted its focus to bombing major cities, including London, in a campaign known as the Blitz, but the RAF's resilience and effective tactics prevented Germany from achieving its objectives. The failure of the Luftwaffe to dominate the RAF marked the first significant defeat for Hitler's military forces. It also boosted Allied morale and demonstrated that the Axis powers could be resisted effectively. Operation Barbarossa, 1941. Operation Barbarossa was the code name for the German invasion of the Soviet Union, launched on June 22, 1941. It was the largest military operation in history, involving over 3 million Axis troops along a 2,900-kilometer front. Hitler aimed to conquer the Western Soviet Union, secure its vast natural resources, and annihilate communism. The initial stages of the invasion were marked by significant German successes, with rapid advances into Soviet territory and encirclements of large Soviet armies. However, logistical challenges, fierce Soviet resistance, and the onset of the harsh Russian winter slowed the German advance. The Soviet Union, under the leadership of Joseph Stalin, began to regroup and counterattack. The defense of key cities, such as Moscow and Leningrad, demonstrated the Soviet capacity for resilience. The failure of Operation Barbarossa marked a turning point in the war, as the Germans were unable to achieve a quick victory and became embroiled in a prolonged and costly conflict on the Eastern Front. Pearl Harbor Attack, 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a surprise military strike by the Imperial Japanese Navy against the United States naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, on December 7, 1941. The attack aimed to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet and prevent American interference in Japan's expansion plans in Southeast Asia. The attack was devastating, resulting in the destruction of 8 battleships, 3 cruisers, and 4 destroyers, as well as significant damage to aircraft and facilities. Over 2,400 Americans were killed, and another 1,000 were wounded. The attack on Pearl Harbor galvanized American public opinion and led to the United States declaring war on Japan the following day. On December 11, 1941, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, bringing America fully into World War II. The entry of the United States into the war marked a turning point, as American industrial and military might began to mobilize against the Axis powers. Battle of Midway, 1942. The Battle of Midway, fought from June 4 to 7, 1942, was a decisive naval battle in the Pacific theater of World War II. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan sought to eliminate the United States as a strategic power in the Pacific and secure its dominance in the region. The Japanese plan involved a surprise attack on the U.S. base at Midway Atoll, but American cryptographers had broken Japanese codes and anticipated the attack. This intelligence allowed the U.S. Navy to prepare and set a trap for the Japanese fleet. During the battle, American forces managed to sink 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, a heavy cruiser, and destroy 248 aircraft, while losing 1 carrier and a destroyer. The battle marked a turning point in the Pacific War, as it significantly weakened the Japanese fleet and shifted the balance of power in favor of the Allies. The victory at Midway halted Japanese expansion and set the stage for Allied offensives in the Pacific. Battle of Stalingrad, 1942 to 1943. The Battle of Stalingrad, lasting from August 1942 to February 1943, was one of the deadliest and most significant battles of World War II. The battle took place in the city of Stalingrad, now Volgograd, and was marked by brutal urban warfare and immense casualties on both sides. German forces, led by General Friedrich Paulus, aimed to capture Stalingrad to secure the Volga River and protect the flanks of the German armies advancing into the Caucasus. The battle devolved into house-to-house fighting, with both sides suffering heavy losses. In November 1942, the Soviet Union launched Operation Uranus, a massive counteroffensive that encircled the German Sixth Army. Cut off from supplies and reinforcements, the Germans were forced to surrender in February 1943. The defeat at Stalingrad marked a turning point on the Eastern Front, as it ended German hopes of capturing the Soviet Union, and began a series of Soviet offensives that would eventually push the Germans back to Berlin. Allied invasion of North Africa, Operation Torch, 1942. Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of French North Africa, began on November 8, 1942. The operation aimed to open a new front in North Africa, relieve pressure on the Soviet Union, and secure control of the Mediterranean. The invasion involved American and British forces landing in Morocco and Algeria, territories controlled by Vichy France, a regime collaborating with Nazi Germany. Despite initial resistance, the Vichy French forces eventually surrendered, and the Allies began advancing eastward towards Tunisia. Operation Torch marked the first major involvement of American forces in the European theater, and demonstrated the growing cooperation between the United States and Britain. The successful campaign led to the eventual defeat of Axis forces in North Africa by May 1943, paving the way for the Allied invasion of Sicily and the Italian mainland. Invasion of Sicily, 1943. Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily, began on July 9, 1943. The campaign aimed to remove Axis forces from the island, secure Mediterranean shipping lanes, and pave the way for the invasion of mainland Italy. The invasion involved a combined airborne and amphibious assault by American, British, and Canadian forces. Despite challenging weather conditions and stiff resistance from German and Italian troops, the Allies secured key objectives and advanced across the island. The successful invasion led to the collapse of the fascist regime in Italy. On July 25, 1943, Benito Mussolini was deposed and arrested, and a new Italian government began secret negotiations with the Allies. The fall of Sicily marked a significant step towards the liberation of Italy and opened a new front in southern Europe. Italian Campaign, 1943 to 1945. The Italian Campaign, lasting from September 1943 to May 1945, involved a series of Allied operations aimed at liberating Italy from Axis control. Following the successful invasion of Sicily, Allied forces landed on the Italian mainland in September 1943. The campaign was marked by challenging terrain, fortified German defenses, and difficult weather conditions. Despite these obstacles, the Allies made steady progress, capturing key cities such as Naples and Rome. Rome was liberated on June 4, 1944, shortly before the D-Day landings in Normandy. The Italian campaign continued with fierce battles at places like Monte Cassino and the Gothic Line. The Allied advance was slow and costly, but by April 1945, German forces in Italy were in retreat. The campaign culminated in the surrender of German forces in Italy on May 2, 1945, just days before the end of the war in Europe. D-Day, Normandy invasion, 1944. D-Day, the Allied invasion of Normandy, took place on June 6, 1944. Codenamed Operation Overlord, it was the largest amphibious assault in history, and aimed to establish a Western front against Nazi Germany. The invasion involved over 156,000 troops from the United States, Britain, Canada, and other Allied nations, landing on 5 beachheads, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword, along the Normandy coast. The operation was supported by extensive aerial and naval bombardments to soften German defenses. Despite facing strong German fortifications and rough seas, the Allies successfully secured the beachheads and began advancing inland. The Normandy invasion marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. It led to the liberation of France and set the stage for the Allied advance into Western Europe, culminating in the fall of Berlin in 1945. Liberation of Paris, 1944. The liberation of Paris occurred on August 25, 1944, following a series of battles between the French resistance and German forces occupying the city. The liberation was part of the larger Allied offensive in Western Europe following the D-Day landings. The French resistance, having been informed of the approaching Allied forces, initiated an uprising against the German occupiers. Fierce street fighting ensued, with the resistance capturing key points in the city. On August 24, 1944, the French 2nd Armored Division, under General Philippe Leclerc, entered Paris, followed by American forces. By August 25, the German garrison in Paris surrendered, and the city was liberated. The event was a significant morale boost for the Allies and marked the decline of German control in Western Europe. It also restored French national pride and paved the way for the re-establishment of the French government. Battle of the Bulge, 1944 to 1945. The Battle of the Bulge, fought from December 16, 1944, to January 25, 1945, was Germany's last major offensive on the Western Front. Codenamed Operation Watch on the Rhine, the surprise attack aimed to split Allied lines, capture the vital Belgian port of Antwerp, and encircle and destroy 4 Allied armies. The offensive caught the Allies off guard, creating a bulge in the front lines as German forces advanced through the Ardennes. Harsh winter weather and fierce fighting characterized the battle, with American troops bearing the brunt of the attack. Despite initial successes, the Germans were unable to achieve their strategic objectives. The Allies regrouped, counterattacked, and eventually pushed the Germans back. The battle resulted in significant casualties on both sides and depleted Germany's reserves of men and material. The failure of the offensive hastened the collapse of the German war effort in the West. Yalta Conference, 1945. The Yalta Conference, held from February 4 to 11, 1945, was a meeting of the Big Three, Allied leaders, Franklin D. Roosevelt of the United States, Winston Churchill of the United Kingdom, and Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. The conference aimed to discuss the post-war reorganization of Europe and the ongoing war against Japan. Key agreements reached at Yalta included the division of Germany into occupation zones controlled by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. The leaders also agreed on the establishment of the United Nations, an international organization to promote peace and cooperation. Additionally, Stalin promised to enter the war against Japan 3 months after the defeat of Germany. The Yalta Conference laid the groundwork for the post-war order but also sowed the seeds of future tensions between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union, leading to the onset of the Cold War. Fall of Berlin, 1945. The Battle of Berlin, the final major offensive of the European theater, began on April 16, 1945, as Soviet forces launched a massive assault on the German capital. The city was defended by a mix of German regular troops, Volkssturm, militia, and Hitler Youth, as well as foreign volunteers. Soviet forces, under the command of Marshals Georgy Zhukov and Ivan Konev, encircled the city and began a relentless assault. Street-to-street fighting ensued, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Adolf Hitler, realizing the hopelessness of the situation, committed suicide on April 30, 1945. On May 2, 1945, Berlin's defenders surrendered, and the city fell to the Soviets. The fall of Berlin marked the effective end of Nazi Germany. On May 7, 1945, Germany signed an unconditional surrender, and May 8 was declared Victory in Europe, VE Day, marking the official end of World War II in Europe. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 1945. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were the first and only use of nuclear weapons in warfare. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb codenamed Little Boy on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The explosion resulted in the immediate deaths of an estimated 70,000 to 80,000 people, with tens of thousands more dying from radiation sickness and injuries in the following months. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, the United States dropped a second atomic bomb codenamed Fat Man on Nagasaki. This bombing caused the deaths of an estimated 40,000 to 75,000 people, with additional fatalities from subsequent radiation exposure. The unprecedented destruction and loss of life caused by the atomic bombings shocked Japan and the world. On August 15, 1945, Japan announced its unconditional surrender, leading to the official end of World War II on September 2, 1945. The bombings marked a significant turning point in warfare and ushered in the nuclear age, raising ethical and strategic debates that continue to this day. Establishment of the United Nations, 1945. The United Nations, UN, was established on October 24, 1945, with the aim of preventing future conflicts, fostering international cooperation, and promoting peace and security. The UN replaced the League of Nations, which had failed to prevent World War II. The UN Charter was signed by 50 countries at the United Nations Conference on International Organization in San Francisco on June 26, 1945. The organization consists of several bodies, including the General Assembly, the Security Council, the International Court of Justice, and various specialized agencies. The establishment of the United Nations marked a significant step towards creating a framework for international diplomacy and conflict resolution. It provided a platform for nations to address global issues collectively and seek peaceful solutions to disputes. Nuremberg Trials, 1945 to 1946. The Nuremberg Trials, held from November 20, 1945, to October 1, 1946, were a series of military tribunals that prosecuted key Nazi leaders for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. The trials were held in Nuremberg, Germany, under the auspices of the Allied powers. The trials marked the first time in history that an international court was used to hold individuals accountable for atrocities committed during wartime. 24 high-ranking Nazi officials were indicted, including Hermann Göring, Rudolf Hess, and Joachim von Ribbentrop. The charges included planning and executing the Holocaust, waging aggressive war, and committing atrocities against civilians and prisoners of war. The Nuremberg trials established important legal precedents for international law, including the principle that individuals could be held accountable for their actions even if they were following orders. The trials also laid the groundwork for future war crimes tribunals and contributed to the development of international human rights law. Marshall Plan, 1948. The Marshall Plan, officially known as the European Recovery Program, was initiated in 1948 by the United States to provide economic aid for the reconstruction of war-torn Europe. Named after Secretary of State George C. Marshall, the plan aimed to prevent the spread of communism, promote political stability, and foster economic recovery. The plan provided over $12 billion, equivalent to approximately $130 billion today, in economic assistance to Western European countries. The funds were used to rebuild infrastructure, modernize industry, and stabilize economies. The Marshall Plan also encouraged European cooperation and integration, laying the foundation for the eventual creation of the European Union. The Marshall Plan was highly successful, contributing to the rapid recovery and economic growth of Western Europe in the post-war years. It also strengthened the political and economic ties between the United States and Europe, helping to establish a stable and prosperous international order. Formation of NATO, 1949. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was established on April 4, 1949, with the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty in Washington, D.C. The founding members included the United States, Canada, and 10 Western European countries: Belgium, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, and the United Kingdom. NATO was created in response to the growing threat of Soviet expansion and aimed to provide collective security against aggression. The core principle of NATO is enshrined in Article 5 of the treaty, which states that an armed attack against one member is considered an attack against all members, obligating them to respond collectively. The formation of NATO marked a significant development in the Cold War, establishing a military alliance that would play a crucial role in the defense of Western Europe. It also signaled the beginning of a long-standing partnership between North American and European nations in promoting security and stability.